Good morning, students. Today we will start with the lesson Diversity in Living Organisms. Need for classification of living organisms. See, we have already studied in 8th standard that living organisms are classified into so many groups. So, what is the need for that classification of living organisms that we have to know? So, living organisms have evolved on the earth over millions of years. There is a vast variety of living organisms, and living organisms show a wide range of variations. Some microscopic bacteria are of a few micrometers in size, and some, like whales and redwood trees, are about 30 meters and 100 meters in size. Some pine trees live for thousands of years, while insects like mosquitoes die within a few days. Some organisms are colorless and even transparent, and some are brightly colored. So, to understand this and study all these organisms is impossible. If they are arranged into different groups based on their similarities in characteristics, then it is easier to study the different groups as a whole. So, classification of living organisms. The arranging of organisms into different groups on the basis of the similarities in their characteristics is called classification of living organisms. So, what are the basis of classification of living organisms? The main characteristic which are considered for classification of living organisms into different groups are whether they are made of prokaryotic cell or eukaryotic cells, whether the cells occur singly or they are grouped together and live as an individual group, whether they produce their own food by photosynthesis or get their food from outside. Of the organisms which produce their own food, that is plants, what is the level of organization of their body? Of the animals, what is the level of organization of their body and what are their special organs and their functions? So, on the basis of all these categories, the classification of living organisms will be done. So, the characteristics used for classification of plants will be different from the characteristics used for classification of animals, because plants make their own food and they are autotrophs, whereas animals get their food from outside, so they are heterotrophs. Now, classification and evolution. The present day complex living organisms have evolved from the earlier simple forms due to the changes in their body designs over millions of years. The body designs of living organisms are gradually changing due to the changes in environment and the need to adapt themselves to the changes in the environment. Some groups of organisms having ancient body designs have not changed much during evolution and have simple forms and structures. So, these organisms are called primitive or lower organisms. And some organisms have acquired their body designs relatively recently and have complex forms and structure. So, these organisms are called advanced or higher organisms. Now, the hierarchy of classification, that is groups. Living organisms have been broadly classified into 5 main kingdoms. They are Monera, Protista, Fungi, Plantae and Animalia. Each kingdom has been further classified into smaller subgroups as we have already studied in the 8th standard, that is, which we call them as the levels, various levels. Kingdom, phylum for plants, division for animals, class, order, family, genus, species. So, by arranging organisms on the basis of hierarchy and characteristics into smaller and smaller groups, we arrive at the basic unit of classification called species. So, species means is group of organisms which are similar enough to breed and perpetuate. Okay. So, we already studied in 8th standard regarding this. That is, species is the basic component for the classification. So, in the species, the organisms which are similar enough that to breed among themselves. So that group is called as species. Now the 5 kingdom classification of living organisms. We can see here organisms are first classified into 2 groups, prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So prokaryote means the organisms in which the nucleus will not be covered by a cell membrane, isn't it? That is, nuclear membrane is not present. That is called prokaryotic cell. Whereas eukaryotic cell, where the exact nucleus with the nuclear membrane is present. So in prokaryotes, monera is there. In eukaryotes, again unicellular and multicellular organisms are there, single celled and many celled. So unicellular, protista, multicellular without cell wall. So protista again with cell wall, do not perform photosynthesis. Fungi are there, able to perform photosynthesis. Plantae are there, animalia. So here prokaryote only one group, that is monera kingdom will be there in prokaryote. In eukaryote remaining 4 kingdoms are there, that is protista, fungi, plantae and animalia. Now, regarding the remaining, that is monera, then protista, animalia, fungi, plantae, that we'll study in the next class.